There is, I think I've mentioned to people, there is a very high correlation actually between gifted musicians and gifted programmers. And I came up the ranks ultimately in my professional career as a pretty strong engineer. And whether the two, were, had any correlation directly or not, but I think they're both creative outlets at the end of the day. And so that's where the connection happens to be.
That's amazing. Well, that's a great segue from, into your background and career, obviously. Dave, now, as a side note, do you still play, off and on occasion?
Not as much. I mean, so we just moved. You can kind of see by the backdrop here. We're in sunny Florida. Well, maybe you can't see quite as well, but we moved out of we were living in New Jersey for the last 25 or so years. We raised both of our kids there, and when COVID hit, we wound up down in South Florida, and we were initially renting down here because you couldn't be outside in New Jersey. You couldn't go to a park. You couldn't do anything. And so we rented down here, and our kids my daughter was a sophomore in college, my son was a sophomore in high school, but I was doing a lot of the same work, consulting to various companies and over video just like this. And as I'm doing it, I'm looking out the window at the ocean and I'm seeing stingrays swimming by and all this kind of stuff. And I go, boy, there's nothing wrong with living here, right? So we started looking for a place down here and got caught up in the whirlwind that was the real estate market going bonkers. And finally, we found some place that was, we thought was at a reasonable price point. But when we were getting prepared to move, I had all this music equipment down in our basement. That I had a virtual music studio down there. I had multi-track recorders. I had a guitar synthesizer and MIDI keyboards and electronic drum set and all this stuff. And I come home one day to realize that my wife gave most of it away because she felt that we didn't need it to move. So there you have it. So my equipment, if not my music career, are pretty much done at this stage.
Oh yeah. Well, that's cool. It's a great background. If, I see it at a conference going forward, maybe someone who has a guitar you can pick up and, do a side gig, which would be amazing.
Actually, there's a group called Wall Street Rocks, in New York that years ago I was invited to play with them, and I actually didn't take them up on it. But there's a bunch of guys on the street that will get together and just jam it out a bit, and it'd probably be fun to get back into it. But it's been a while. It's been a while since I've seriously played. I can still pick up a guitar. I don't know that my singing voice is quite as good as it used to be, but I can still play. But it's you fumble around a little bit, to kind of get back into it. And I should probably do that at some point. But yeah, no, I made the career choice not to be a professional musician. That was too hard of a road to cross. And I started interning on the street actually when I was 16. I was doing software development for Security Pacific Bank way back then, and developing in Pascal on VAX VMS. And I was actually, even before VAX, it was PDP-11s, and RSX-11M was the operating system. And so that was my introduction to coding for Wall Street. I had grown up, I always loved technology. I always loved computer science. I had a knack for it. I had probably before the predecessor to the Apple Mac was the Apple Lisa. I had one of those. I had a Commodore 64. I had all these different computers that I used to program and write games and all this. And in fact, in college, given my love of music, I wound up writing one of the first MIDI sequencers, that I did as a special project in college. And so I wrote a 16-track MIDI sequencer that my professor loved so much that because his son was also a musician, and he brought it home to his son, and his son started using it to record music. So, but when I went to Wall Street, I started off as an intern at 16. A lot of my stuff was still running on the street for many, many years, including at some of the custody banks like Bank of New York Mellon, and that was my intro to the street.
Gary, let's get back again. A little background of your start in the career would be helpful from, from where you started. Obviously, you kind of segued into nicely into your personal background of being a musician and musician. But yeah, it'd be great to hear your story from a career perspective.
Yeah, so after Drexel Burnham collapsed, Drexel was my first job out of college. I landed at BlackRock, which was at that time Blackstone Financial Management. They shared an office with the Blackstone Group, who was a major investor, and I was the 20th person hired at the company. And in those days, BlackRock was primarily trading U.S. domestic fixed income, a very, very high concentration on asset-backed and mortgage-backed securities, CMOs, the products of that ilk. And you could not buy anything off the shelf in those days to support those assets. And so necessity was sort of the mother of invention. And I drew up something on what was, I guess, the corollary to Visio back in those days. Visio didn't yet exist, but this was sort of an application that allowed you to put together flowcharts. And walked into my boss's office, this gentleman, Ben Golub, who was the head of risk and technology and one of the founding partners, and basically said to him, I think this is what we should do. And Ben takes a look at it and he says, well, he says, nobody does anything like that. And oh, by the way, we might be out of business tomorrow. So that gives you a sense of how early on it was in BlackRock's existence. And truthfully, he was probably right. I mean, they very well could have been out of business the next day because it was such a nascent firm. And I decided actually to go ahead and build it anyway, despite him telling me more or less not to do it. And so the genesis of that platform started off as a skunkworks project. And I had tremendous support from the head of operations, this gentleman, John Davis, who became a very good friend of mine over the years, and then also a junior portfolio manager, Curtis Arledge, who also became a good friend. And they were sort of my two advocates and two guinea pigs when testing it. And we came out with it and put it out as a beta on the desktops of the portfolio management team and the operations team and so forth. And everybody seemed to gravitate towards it. Now, around that time, you also had this flurry of bankruptcies happening from places that were investing primarily in CMO residuals. And if you know anything about CMO residuals, they tend to have a very high stated yield, but you very rarely actually ever see that yield. The yield can be as high as 30, 40% or more sometimes. But very often you'll wind up with zero. And so you had places like Orange County, California, you had Gibson greeting cards, you had a number of other investors that were buying CMO residuals and they lost out and they wound up declaring bankruptcy. So 60 Minutes wound up doing a piece on this in those days. And they're talking about, basically the risks of these types of products. And they come to BlackRock to show the kinds of systems and capabilities that you need to have if you're going to meaningfully trade in these assets. And they zoom in on a screen, and there happens to be the system that I built, which was not yet known as Aladdin. But they said, this is what you have to have if you're going to trade these kinds of assets. So Charlie Halleck, who was a peer of mine in the early days and over time grew to become the chief operating officer of BlackRock after it had grown to a very large organization, he's really the one to be credited with commercializing that platform into what is known today as Aladdin. And he saw the opportunity. They started getting a lot of unsolicited interest on, hey, we saw this piece, we're interested in looking at this platform. We need something very much like it, and that was sort of the genesis of Aladdin. Now, the funny thing is, I was there for probably about 5 years or so. I left. I became CTO at a couple of hedge funds, the last one being York Capital, and I was then got a call from Charlie Halleck again saying, hey, are you interested in coming back? I think he felt that the organization had lost a little bit of its innovative spirit, and I was the guy to try to inject that again. So I come back to BlackRock for a second tour of duty, and now it's a much bigger firm. Now it's just completed the BGI acquisition. It had done the Malim acquisition already. It had the iShares product under its umbrella. much larger firm than what I left. And they now have a formal HR onboarding process for every new joiner. And even though this is my second tour, I wind up having to go through the HR onboarding process. So I'm sitting in the room, and they roll out a TV with a video on it, and it's Charlie talking about the early days of BlackRock and the genesis of Aladdin. And on there, he holds up a piece of paper with a workflow diagram on it, which is the exact document that I had created and shown to Ben Gala many years earlier that he told me not to do. And that was the genesis of Aladdin. And the other funny thing, and this was probably now 20 or so years after my original time there, the other funny thing was they now had a leaderboard of all of the code contributions to the in production instance of Aladdin. And all those years later, my name was still at the top of the list. So that was kind of cool, actually. I had all these people coming into my office. Oh, you're that guy. And I don't know, it was a little surreal, to be honest with you, coming back. But that was my time at BlackRock. I came back the second time around. I was heading up global engineering, and really, it's funny because you walk away from a firm, you come back years later. Now you've been out in the wild for a number of years. You've acquired some new skills and some new perspectives, and you realize, boy, I think I should have done this a little bit differently when I developed BlackRock's Aladdin the first time around, and now you try to introduce some of those things, and it's a bigger challenge because what was organic in those days now becomes institutionalized, and you got a lot of people who are working around it, and making change becomes that much more difficult. Some of it becomes legacy and harder to remove, and I think we did some good things during my second tour in terms of trying to increase the speed and the performance to be able to handle new products, new asset classes, but it was certainly not as fluid as the early days, and that's I think is the nature of large organizations. Become much more difficult to innovate, and part of that is just because of all the fiber in those organizations and how everything is linked together and how they operate. You're changing the wheels on a car running down the hill. So I think that's something that you see at a lot of larger organizations. But to BlackRock's credit, I do think that they still have the founding partners are still at the helm. It'll be interesting to see what happens when that changes, and who will ultimately succeed Larry. But they've managed to keep a certain cultural edifice around BlackRock that really still is very, at least in my time back the second time, was still in many ways very similar to what I left, and that's really a testament to the way in which they've led that organization.
Yeah, definitely. As corporations grow, got to put in that structure, different processes and whatnot. So really cool to see, how you help build that platform and how it changed over time. Tell us about where you're at today. So you started a company, Fintova. Tell us about what prompted you to want to start this firm, and then talk to us a little bit about what you guys are doing and working on.
Yeah, so after BlackRock, I went to that gentleman, Curtis Arledge, who I mentioned, who was the junior PM. He had returned to BlackRock for a second tour of duty as well, and he was the chief investment officer of fixed income at BlackRock on his return trip. And just as I was onboarding, he was leaving to go take the helm at BNY Mellon's investment management franchise, heading up asset and wealth technology. And so about a year or so after his non-solicit was fulfilled, he reached out and asked if I would like to run technology for BNY Mellon Investment Management. And so I went to the bank, became the chief information officer of investment management there. And, I had a pretty good run there. We were there for about 5 years doing some interesting things. But the thing that struck me back then was I came on to that platform, and I looked at the budget that I had inherited, and about 85% of that budget was allocated to BAU, business as usual activities, lights on, break fixed, that type of stuff, support. And the 15% or so that was allocated to what was called strategic, if you really looked at that portfolio, you go, not so strategic really, okay? And the organization, I think, had somewhat devolved into almost a backroom IT type organization where they really didn't have very close alignment in many ways with the businesses that they were supporting. And so the buy-in and the support from the, BNY Mellon ran but still runs a boutique multi-manager type platform. The boutiques, I don't think, felt that they were getting value out of the center of the organization, including technology, though not necessarily limited to technology. And mostly what we were providing was a support function, infrastructure support, and then we were providing a Charles River OMS Center of Excellence. And those were the two core things that we did. And also supporting Dreyfus, I should say, as well. And but the boutiques, I don't think they entrusted much to us. And so the goal was really to change the organization, to change the culture of the organization. And we did that, and we managed to become much more strategically aligned. We began developing intellectual capital again and building new things and ultimately getting buy-in from our boutiques as well as from actually other parts of the bank. But the interesting thing about that journey was the fact that most organizations, as I was alluding to even with BlackRock, most organizations, as they get larger, they lose their ability to innovate. And so what they try to do, in some cases I've seen, is they will try to create this concept of innovation centers or innovation platforms or projects or whatever. And it misses the entire point, because innovation tends to be very organic. And when you try to manage innovation, when you try to sort of create, goal-oriented innovation, it doesn't usually work out very well. The best thing that you can do is try to create a culture that promotes innovation, which also means that you have to allow failure. And typically the way people are compensated in large financial institutions is not based on their failures, but based on the success that they may have and the success that the organization may have. And there's nothing wrong with that in principle, but if you don't also compensate for failure that may be part of a legitimate effort and a wholehearted effort and initiative to try to do something innovative, then you're basically going to influence people not to innovate. You're going to disincentivize them to innovate. And I think that's what tends to happen. And so if you look at many of the financial institutions today, my view is that digital and technology has sort of been stagnant for many, many years. When I first got into the business back at Drexel and then later at BlackRock, the industry at large were very early adopters of digital and newer technologies. And over time, a lot of that has become legacy baggage for them. And the interesting thing about that is the kind of people that you then wind up having on your team and are able to retain that are interested in maintaining that legacy baggage is not the same kind of people who are going to drive cutting edge innovation or AI adoption or things like that. It's a different breed of talent, really. And so if you've got a portfolio that's 85% of that is BAU, then the talent is going to reflect that portfolio on average. And so it becomes very, very difficult for these organizations, I think, to change their platforms or to change technology in any meaningful way. So I had just gotten out of UBS. After BlackRock, I wound up at UBS. I was the chief information officer in charge of global asset management at UBS. And as I was leaving, I was wondering, what do I want to do next? And I had been within the financial institutions for quite a while. I had a pretty good track record across the breadth of my career. And my view was that the industry had lagged in terms of digital adoption, and that given my background, I was somewhat uniquely qualified to help in that journey. And so I launched Fintova. And I also recognize that journey is not a technology journey per se, but it's a business journey, which means that you need other types of disciplines surrounding you if you're really going to be successful. If you take something whether it's AI or data architecture or new technology or new application or order management, so whatever it happens to be, if you take it and you simply turn it into a technology project and you don't actually turn it into a business project, then it's going to tend to struggle. And when times are bad, it's probably going to be cut or it's going to be neutered in some way, and it's not going to be very good. So I wound up recruiting a couple of the folks that I used to work with that were in different disciplines, complementary to my own. So people who were marketing officers, operation officers, risk management officers, folks like that, who I thought would complement what I was trying to do on the data and technology side. And so that's really what Fintova launched as, was a consultancy providing digital services to the industry. And we were very, and we still are very explicitly focused on financial services with a very heavy disposition towards the buy side. And so we will engage hedge funds, we will engage traditional asset managers, we'll engage insurance companies, we'll engage private equity, venture capital. Obviously private credit is a big one right now. So all those different participants we will engage. Doesn't mean that we won't also engage cap markets and the sell side. We do from time to time, but predominantly we are buy side focused. And I would say we have sort of a three-legged stool at the moment. We have the consulting business, which is I think fairly understandable. We also have recently begun to develop a portfolio of fintech companies that have reached out to us and are looking for help with their operations and with their go-to-market initiatives. And given our reputations and our connective tissue within the industry, they are entrusting us to help them. And so it sort of started out initially somewhat opportunistically, and the portfolio has continued to grow to the point where we're getting a number of different global fintechs that have reached out to us for support and help there. And then the third thing is, since I moved down to Florida, it's very different than New York. Well, I was up in New York a couple of weeks ago, meeting with clients and old friends and prospects. And I walk out on the street, and because I've been there for so long, most of my career there, and made so many relationships, invariably I wind up bumping into people, just walking from one place to the next. And that happened more than a few times, the 2 weeks or so ago when I was up there. But down here in Florida, it's very different. You see a lot of investment talent that's been migrating down to South Florida, and it is truly becoming Wall Street South. And it's not an exaggeration. There is a lot of investment talent that has come down here and is continuing to come down here. But what you haven't had come down here is the operational and infrastructure yet. You haven't seen the ops and the tech and the accounting and all those other support functions follow suit. And part of that may be also because the cost of living down in South Florida has grown dramatically to the point where it's not that much different, frankly, from living in New York City at this point. But we felt that there was an opportunity really to assist with all these hedge funds and asset managers down here in Florida with the services side of the business, but also trying to create that connective tissue amongst them, right? Where we can bring together hedge funds and service providers, and we can bring together asset managers and allocators and different types of parties that make up this industry in a more cohesive way. And so we've also created this international funds organization as a means through which to do that, with Florida being the first launch point. And so it's known as FIFO, Florida International Funds Organization. And again, the goal there is really to bring together all these different parties in a more business-friendly, sometimes educational, sometimes just networking, but bringing them together in a more meaningful way than what and certainly what I've seen down here generally, which has been very difficult to navigate, except at some of these events that sometimes are held. So that's sort of the three-legged stool that we're focused on at the moment.
Yeah, great, Gary. Very cool. I guess I have a couple questions. I'm intrigued now, just based on kind of where you guys are sitting in the thick of things in Florida, which is amazing. I love Miami as well, and the whole area there. Great opportunity for innovation, right? I'm just curious, kind of the current state of the industry for asset management for financial services, right? Where are the challenges? Where are the opportunities? Where do you see us, whether it be service provider side or others, with technology, with innovation? Where is it going, and kind of where we're at today?
Well, I mean, the big notable change, obviously, is the impact that data and AI are going to have on the industry. And I would say that very few firms that I've spent time with, either in consultation or prior employment even, or, just speaking with them, are truly prepared. And in order to maximize the use of AI, you really need a data architecture to do that. And most organizations, most hedge funds, most asset managers tend to be a bit of a hot mess at times, and they have sort of a very federated collection of data assets, but they're really not integrated in any cohesive way. And so I would say that is the number one issue and opportunity facing the industry, is in how they get a handle on these data assets, not just the transactional and reference data assets that are more operational in nature, and the traditional ones that they tend to have sitting in various relational databases or application endpoints, but also the alternative data assets that allow you to derive more interesting insights and inputs if you can analyze them properly at scale and in a timely manner. And that's where I think AI, in part, is really going to drive a tremendous amount of change in this industry. It used to be, earlier in my career, where empirically you would see that unless a hedge fund, for example, happened to run a systematic strategy where technology and data was at the core of its DNA and its investment thesis, right? They really didn't value technology, most firms, until they got to be about $5 billion in assets under management. And so that tended to be sort of the threshold that you would see on the street, which is they would use Bloomberg AIM, and they would use, obviously, the terminal, and they would use their PBs and their FAs and all of that. But they wouldn't themselves really invest much in bringing together some type of deeper technology capability within their organizations. And what I believe will happen, given the threat and the opportunity that AI both represents, is that you're going to see that number in terms of AUM slide down market. And the reason for that is, the analogy I've used is, it's sort of like launching a business, right? Would you launch a new business today without a website? And I think most people would say, well, no. Why would you do that, right? And I think that same existential question is going to be out there for data and AI. Would you launch your new business without a meaningful data capability or the use of AI in some reasonable way? And I think 5 years from now, the answer is going to be no. Why would you do that? And so that means that 5 billion number has to start moving down closer to the emerging managers that are launching, where they have to start thinking about these types of capabilities much sooner in their life cycle. I think for the ones that don't think about that, as I say, I really do believe it's pretty existential, that I think there's going to be a tremendous number of casualties in the industry, or you'll see increased consolidation, because that train is coming down the track, and it's coming down quite quickly. And no, it's not perfect right now, and it's going to present a ton of challenges for sure. And there's things like intellectual property rights and hallucinations and all these different types of things that have to be solved. But there's also a ton of investment going into that space, and it's a big change for the industry for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned all the different type, or a couple different like data types. Like you mentioned like transactions as an example, more like operational. Obviously, you mentioned alternative data sets. So I suppose that could be, really anything that's not market pricing data. So talk to us about how these, I mean, these are just two random examples, but like talk to us about how you mentioned you guys work with a lot of like buy side asset managers. So how do these data sets interact, and what value can AI bring to these data sets?
Well, so one of the biggest growth opportunities right now in asset management is not so much the traditional strategies, equities, buy side, either, long only or even long short, but in alternative assets, right? So could be everything from real estate to, I mean, obviously crypto is is a growing asset class as well. But when you think about, let's take an example like real estate or private credit for that matter, okay? And you think about what type of data you need to have in order to best manage that type of asset. If you're underwriting private credit, well, you should certainly understand who the borrower is, right? You should understand the industry that the borrower happens to operate. You should understand the geographical location that the borrower happens to run their shop in. You should understand, well, what's the macroeconomic impact of that particular region? Is there something going on there that might forestall that borrower's impact's ability to pay? If it's a real estate asset, what's the likelihood that my anchor tenants are going to remain in place at a shopping mall that I happen to be invested in? And can I look at satellite imagery as a proxy for foot traffic that's going to that mall on a regular basis? For commercial real estate, can I look at turnstile swipes, as a proxy for, what kind of vacancy are we seeing in that particular building before the lease renewal even comes up? And so, because if I realize that, maybe my lease isn't coming up, or my prime tenant's lease isn't coming up for 2 years, but what I have seen over the past couple of months is generally reduced traffic going through those turnstiles. Well, I kind of know that at some point in time, when that lease does come for renewal, the likelihood is that tenant may not actually require as much space anymore, right? Or maybe the foot traffic is so light that maybe they have financial issues that I should otherwise be, aware of. And so bringing all these things together, all these, exogenous inputs, in addition to all the traditional transactional inputs that you capture and the normal appraisals and all the other things that you do on a recurring basis, bringing together these other insights and bringing them together in a way that is, again, cohesive, where I can sort of, wed the information that I see in satellite imagery with the information that I have in terms of my transactions and my holdings, and also with traffic patterns, and also with lease renewals and all these other things, in a way that allows me to really get a much more comprehensive picture of not just what I have in terms of the performance of my assets, but the risk management of those assets as well. And so I think that is going to be a tremendous thing, especially, again, as a sector like private credit that has been growing as the banks are sort of narrowing their books in terms of taking on loans. The private credit market has expanded significantly and is continuing to do so. There's increasingly a lot of dry powder out there that wants to get deployed, and sometimes when that happens, it doesn't get deployed in the best way possible. So really understanding what your risks, what the opportunities are, maybe identifying new opportunities, that's where the combination of the more traditional data sets with these newer alternative data sets, I think, if brought together in a meaningful way, is really going to add value. But therein lies the challenge, right? Is bringing them together in a way where you really can sort of query them cohesively, whether that's through AI or through some other means, and that requires a data architecture that allows you to do that. So that's why I keep coming back to, when everyone's talking about AI, they're not wrong. AI is a thing, and AI is definitely going to have a huge impact on the street. But if you don't have that data architecture in place to be able to capture, to curate, to basically govern all of those data assets, there's not much you're going to be able to do. LLMs are trained statically. LLMs are not, they're not getting contemporaneous data. So there are mechanisms that you can use like RAG to kind of ingest, have them almost act as an interpreter where you fill the prompt up with with all sorts of relevant information, and then you ask the AI model to basically regurgitate it to you in a more human-like way. But but again, you need to have the data architecture to bring that in. You need your vector databases to be able to sort of match the semantic query with the actual data assets that you have. So there's all these different things that firms need to be thinking about. It's not just hopping on ChatGPT and calling it a day, or hopping inside of an AI tool that's embedded in one of your endpoint applications, as many increasingly are, and calling it a day. If you walk into most large financial institutions and even the smaller ones today, and you ask them, can they present to you a full, forget about even the exogenous data, can they present to you a full picture of their investments and their risk and all of that at any given time? The answer for most of them, outside of the marketing campaigns, will be not really. And I know this because I have spoken with many of them. And we're not just talking about the mom and pop shops. We're talking about the big brand names that that people, the retail market knows, and they have a lot of challenges in bringing all that data together. So to me, this is the most pressing thing in the industry that's come about in quite a number of years.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of unstructured data everywhere, right, in our industry. That's run rampant. I'm just curious, where do you see AI having the most impact on financial services? Obviously, what you just mentioned was a great thing. You have to get their data together. Data architecture has to be on point. I guess, what's the most impact that you see where in financial services, and also how are firms preparing to get ready for this process of change moving forward?
Well, I think the first steps are probably going to happen with investor relations. You can have an LLM generate commentary, and you can have it generate, communications and messaging to your investors. Put together pitch books, things like that, DDQs. So I do think that you'll see it applied there. Maybe in some of the legal work as well, and maybe even compliance, possibly operations reconciliation. You'll see tools used there as well. Not necessarily all Gen AI, but different types of AI models. Where I think ultimately it will go is it will move towards alpha generation and risk management. And if you think about the way, so the world is split into two types of asset managers broadly, right? You've got your passive managers, you've got your active managers. And the passive managers are a machine. They have to be very highly efficient because the margins in that business are very, very small, right? So you win that battle by really going to market at scale. And that's what BlackRock has done, and Vanguard and State Street, and and the bigger, for example, ETF shops are scalable machines. Whether they are at peak efficiency or not is debatable, and some would argue probably even internally at some of these firms that they're not. But the point is that it's a volume play, right? When you're going at the passive market. The active market is different. The active market is about the intelligence that you bring to the equation, right? And how quickly can you gather and manage that intelligence and deploy that intelligence, whether it's on a trade idea, whether it's making sure that your risk is properly coordinated, all those different types of capabilities that you have to have in order to manage those assets. And so I do think it's going to get there. But on the passive side, it's hard to imagine that machines at some point aren't going to replace portfolio managers, because the economics of it makes sense to do so at some stage. On the active side, I see it as being an enabler for portfolio managers, at least initially. Does it ultimately become something more than that? Does it become artificial general intelligence that can truly replicate what a human PM does? Perhaps at some point it does, but I don't see that happening immediately. I think it's going to take some time to get to that point. And because, again, these models are imperfect, right? And you really have to continually train them. You have to monitor them. You have to make sure that the outputs that they're generating are reasonable. And so there'll still be sort of a four eyes principle, I think, applied to them, even if they generate trade ideas. But make no mistake that that's the direction that things are moving in. The other opportunity is that if you look at most asset managers today, especially multi-manager shops, they're offering a collection of products, right? The strategy is a product, right? I'm going into a long short. I'm going into a quant fund. I'm going into an event-driven fund, right? So whatever it happens to be, right? And there's a sort of a product line that you're doing, and I think products typically from manager to manager, there's very few outliers. There are very few that perform just incredibly well relative to their peers over time, and others that perform incredibly poorly relative to their peers over time. It is sort of a natural, distribution, right? And a normal distribution. And so you're going to have those outliers, you're going to have the tails, but most of them are going to sort of be in the middle, which means that performance is very difficult to differentiate. And so I think ultimately what will differentiate those managers is the capability to introduce more customized solutions for their underlying investors, whether those are institutional or retail. I think that will be stickier than just offering, go buy my equity fund or go buy my credit fund or whatever. And so and there again, data is critically important to being able to do that at scale. So I think those are a couple of areas where I think, again, there's opportunity, but there's also a challenge. And for the firms that get it right, I think they're really going to be in the pole position as things evolve.
Yeah, it almost sounds like from an alpha generation perspective, it's almost like for some of these bigger firms, like get as much data as we possibly can and give it to this AI and see if it can generate these outliers, see if it can find this interesting information. I think I heard it, maybe like Jim Simon or something, but he's like, there's like a full moon, or if like the Chicago Bears like win, like does it impact the market? Can we find outlier, probabilities here?
Well, yeah. And look, firms like that are, as I say, if you run systematic strategies, then this is, data and AI are not such a huge leap for you, right? So a firm like Renaissance or something that has historically run, systematic strategies is going to be attuned to this type of thing much, much quicker. It's going to be a natural progression for them. And maybe they were early adopters already. But if you look at many of the other managers out there, the fundamental managers, some of the private equity money, some of, venture capital, generally private credit, they tend to be very, very process oriented. But not necessarily data-driven in everything that they do. And you can walk into any number of countless hedge funds and asset managers on the street and find that the vast majority of the investment book and investment ideation process is being managed on an Excel spreadsheet. And sometimes people don't even have enough visibility into the composition of that spreadsheet to the point where if that manager happens to get hit by a bus the next day, you've got this tremendous amount of operational and key man risk that's not easily overcome. And so the industry still runs a substantial portion of its portfolio on spreadsheets. And that, I think, it's always been a systematic risk, I believe, for those organizations. But as more of a data architecture and AI and those capabilities come into play, I think it's really going to become a glaring weakness as well. And so and that's why I say too, I think even whereas 5 billion used to be that threshold level, I think it's going to start moving further downstream because it has to, because firms just are going to have to consider it out of the gate if they really want to raise capital and build a good business.
Yeah, that's a great point, Gary. And you made some other good points earlier about just the size of firm and, challenges with innovation, right? And this is something you can't ignore, I guess. So from a size of firm perspective, or others, maybe the emerging manager or mid-sized firms more equipped to make changes faster than the bigger players in the space. to adopt quicker?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? I think I think that the industry is stuck in this ebb and flow of hiring and firing cycles. Very often. Right now, we're sort of in a firing cycle, right, where we're seeing an increase in terminations and RIFs. And what usually happens is that when times get tougher, the industry tends to offload talent, and then when times recover, they tend to backfill the very same talent. And in between those peaks and valleys, they haven't really changed the operating model very much. And so they really are not moving anywhere. It's just sort of fits and starts. And when you rehire and backfill that same talent, very often, your total cost, even first of all, you're offloading people, and you've got severance charges, and you've got healthcare and benefits and things like that go along, COBRA, all those things that follow those people. And then when you hire them, you got recruiting charges, and you got onboarding, and I think in the long run they wind up spending more money over the course of those cycles than they otherwise might. And I understand the philosophy of live to fight another day, but there might be better ways to do it. The other part of it is that your talent, as I mentioned before, when you have an organization that is very, very highly allocated towards BAU types of activities, and your talent reflects that, you're going to need to find a way to import better talent, or at least different talent with different sets of skills to be able to drive the business forward, along with these new technology capabilities, be that AI or blockchain or anything else. And that means trying to recruit and retain that talent. And the industry, again, used to be very, very alluring for people because of the compensation, frankly, as a big draw. But I don't think that has kept pace. You can work in the technology industry and get equal or more compensation in some cases. So I think that it's one of the other things that we look at with Fintova, which is it better, instead of hiring all these FTEs and then firing all these FTEs and doing that dance all the time, is it actually better and more productive to go out and get contract resources? Because yes, there may be a premium that you pay for a contract resource to some extent, but the contract resource also isn't getting bonus compensation. The contract resource also isn't getting healthcare benefits. The contract resource isn't getting, you're not paying their employment insurance and employment tax and all these other things. And so the truth is that the net cost is probably not that dissimilar, but you might be able to tap into resources who are more, tuned to the types of needs that you may have in order to drive the ball forward. So I think that's one thing to consider. And the other part of it is the strategic leadership of the organization. How much do they value these things? Are they looking at this through the right lens? Are they looking at it simply as a threat or as a tactical thing that we have to have, from a marketing standpoint? Or are they looking at it as more, this has to be part and parcel to the way in which we operate our business? And so those two dimensions, I think, will contribute to the managers that ultimately look to adopt this kind of change and are good change managers, and those who can't. And I don't know that that's necessarily a function of the size of the organization, because you can see really small organizations that do a fantastic job of this, and then you can see really large organizations that don't, and vice versa. And but I think that, leadership is key. I think the talent is ultimately key. Talent is not a commodity, despite what people try to make it. When I worked at BNY Mellon, there was one of my bosses. So I reported duly into the CEO of the investment management business and into the group CIO of the bank. And there was a disposition to offshore all of the talent or most of the development talent. And I refused to do so because I felt that it was counterproductive to what we were trying to do and what we were trying to build. And I used to get confronted with this unit cost analysis, which was that the unit cost in my organization was higher than the unit cost in other organizations. And my retort was always, yeah, but I've lowered the total cost by a third of what it was when I came in the door, because I got better people who were able to do more things and wear more hats. And so talent, I think, is really important. Leadership is really important, and a commitment is really important. And you have to have all three of those ingredients, and a vision. You have to have all those ingredients to be successful in this space. And and sometimes you may not have all the answers, and that's what we hope we're here to help from a strategic standpoint, and then ultimately from a delivery standpoint.
That's great, Gary. I guess obviously to your point, those two things, being able to smooth out the ebb and flow cycle, keep the talent, with your contracted infrastructure that you have of people on your side at Fintova, being in their shoes and having the leadership to support them, hopefully outweighs their issues that they may have going forward. And obviously the turnaround cycle of the things that happen. I guess the question would be how fast people make decisions, right? Curious about that as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, budgets are always, as I say right now, budgets I think are particularly challenging for many firms. And but there's an easy investor analogy here, which is the time to buy is when the market is down, not when the market is up. And so one could make the same case for this: is the time to actually do something innovative and to leapfrog potentially your competition is when the market is down, not when the market is up. And so I think the firms that invest the time, the energy, the capital to really drive and propel their business forward with these new technologies, or to prepare themselves at a minimum to adopt these new technologies, I think that's going to be a key differentiator going forward. And we'll see who does it ultimately.
Yeah. Innovation is never easy, right? Otherwise everybody would be doing it.
It's not, and it's highly organic, and you need to sort of create the culture, as I like to say, for the crazy ones, and that's what a good leader knows how to do. A good leader knows how to empower his or her team with that type of culture, with that kind of support, so that people really can try things, and as I say, that they can fail and still be rewarded for failing, because they tried, not for failing because they mailed it in and didn't do anything, but for failing because they truly tried something initiative, and sometimes it doesn't work. And but you don't want to disincentivize that behavior. You want to promote that behavior. And so I do think you have to reward those people for failure in some way as well. And that's takes a different type of management style.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your the group that you guys are putting together, or that you guys are operating for Miami, and kind of tell us about some of the things that you guys are doing there.
Well, yeah. So like I said, so Fintova. So we're bringing together. We'll be making an announcement soon. We are essentially merging with another firm called NextGen 360, and we will collectively go to market as under the Fintova banner and brand. And we're bringing together all of those consulting services that I mentioned, which is everything from strategic consulting and advisory to C-level resources. We've sat in those seats before, so we feel we have that's our secret sauce at the end of the day. We're not lifelong consultants. We've actually been on that side of the table for most of our careers. And so everything from sort of strategy all the way down to delivery. And so that's certainly key for us. And we think that the Florida market in particular is a growing opportunity, and one that the need has not yet been met. And so we think that we're certainly hoping to position ourselves to be able to do so. That's part of it. Now, we're not limited to servicing Florida. We will certainly service, throughout the continental United States and even in Europe. And sometimes we get calls from Asia as well. But that's certainly been something that we're trying to grow. And then there's the International Funds Organization that I mentioned earlier, which is really sort of that networking platform where we can bring together buyers and sellers, whether that be service providers or vendors, fintechs with asset managers, hedge funds, venture capital and the like, or even allocators with managers or emerging managers maybe who are looking to raise capital. We're bringing those together under the International Funds Org umbrella. And then, of course, we're doing the fintech, what we call the agency business, where we're out there representing various fintechs and building a portfolio that we think fits together quite nicely, so that we can go into various organizations that may have a need and sort of show how these different pieces integrate. You could almost think of us as the sun guard, I guess, of fintech, but without the actual capital infusion. We're not buying these assets, but we are representing them and helping them with their operations and helping them with their go-to-market. And so doing everything that you would want to have a smart money investor do, but we're not the ones who are investing the capital in them. So those are the three things where we're focused.
Awesome. Really cool. Well, Gary, really appreciate the time. We will include links in the show notes for those watching if they'd like to connect with you, connect with your company, learn more about the International Funds Group as well. But Gary, really appreciate the time, and thank you so much for the insights.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.